Often online, I see beginners ask what camera to buy to learn photography, when they have a budget of $100 to $200. My answer is usually the same. Use your phone and save up. Normally you get a much better option when you reach the $500 range. Today I'm testing that. I picked up a used body and a lens for under $150 to see if such a cheap entry-level camera is worth it or if saving a bit longer is the better bet. First, I needed a camera. I went to KEH and MBP and sorted by lowest price and was surprised by how many cheap DSLRs are out there. Honestly, I didn't know half the models I was looking at. Most were older and came out before I had any interest in photography. So, I did what most beginners would do. I asked Reddit. To get authentic answers, I framed the post as if I was just starting out so I could see advice a true beginner would get. Really authentic advice. Here's what I wrote. Hi everyone, I'm looking to get into photography. I have a budget of $100, maybe $150 max. It looks like there are some cheaper DSLR options out there, but there are so many I didn't know what to choose. I've been using my phone and I want a real camera experience. I want to shoot a little bit of everything. Street photography, landscapes, and whatever else I find interesting. I know it's not a big budget, but I'm hoping you'll all have some older suggestions that I can find used for a good price. I got a lot of suggestions. From old Canon Rebels, Pentax came up a few times, and even the Sony Nextline, which I hadn't even considered mirrorless up until I read these comments. Of course, there were a few keep saving comments, which I totally expected because that's what I would have said. However, the brand that by far came up the most was Nikon. There was a whole lot of different models, but the D80, D90, D200, and 300 seemed to be the most recommended. This got me thinking, I wonder if my dad still has his old DSLR that he used when I was a kid. Sure enough, he did, so that made my choice really easy. The Nikon D3100. Now of course, I made sure it was still in the budget range I had set, and it seems like you could get a D3100 from anywhere between $100 to $250 depending on the condition and what lenses you're getting with it. My dad had the 18 to 55 kit lens, the 18 to 105, and a Sigma 70 to 300. Not the best lenses, but they're lenses most beginners would start with, which also made it perfect. This also made me realize a lot of people have family members with old cameras lying around, so it never hurts to ask if they have any you can borrow, and try it out before you really invest in photography. If you really enjoy using that camera, then start investing into your own camera system. Speaking of investing, one thing to consider when getting an older camera is getting new batteries. Batteries degrade over time and become less reliable. This D3100 came out in 2010, so I went on Amazon and picked up a new set of 3 batteries plus a charger for around $30, and it was time to get shooting. Alright, it's my first day out with the Nikon, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a little nervous to take it out. I'm just not confident with DSLRs, as I've always shot mirrorless. I've actually never owned a DSLR before, so it's just a bit of a different shooting experience. But this also is great because it puts me in the mindset of a beginner. So far, I'm finding the EVF on a mirrorless camera a lot easier to learn with because you can see your exposure as it changes, where the DSLR you really have to learn how to meter your shots, which is something I do when I'm shooting film, but I don't do it often and it slows me down a ton, so I'm finding street photography so far a lot harder. Right now, if I were to say which is easier to learn on, a mirrorless or a DSLR, I would say mirrorless again and again. So upon the first few days, I started feeling a bit validated in my theory to save up a bit more money and get a newer, better camera body. This camera just felt old, the lack of a high quality screen to view the images on, and having no touchscreen to operate the camera and the menus may create some first initial struggles for new beginners. Beginners getting their first camera often are used to smartphones, high resolution touchscreens, both of which older DSLRs in the lower price range don't often have. New photographers are also used to a very simple shooting experience, and while this shooting experience isn't complicated, I do think it's a bit harder than learning on a mirrorless camera. The optical viewfinder doesn't preview your exposure, there's a live view, but on this body it felt slow and almost unusable for regular shooting, so I rarely used it. There also wasn't a lot of dials on this camera, so I mainly shot in shutter priority and didn't focus on my aperture and ISO, not a good way to learn. In a lot of ways, shooting on a DSLR, or at least one this old, reminds me more of shooting on film than many of the more modern cameras I own. Now, before moving forward, I think it's important to mention that depending on what camera you get, in this lower budget, the features can be a mixed bag. So don't think of this as a review, but more of a guide on what shooting with such an old camera is like, and what features you may want to look for when you are buying an older DSLR or any camera this old. I'm on day 3 of using the D3100, and I think what's bothered me the most so far is the autofocus. It's just not even close to what I'm used to on cameras even a couple years newer than it. Something like the Sony a6000 that came out in 2014, I think, is significantly better than this camera from 2009, and I think this is a big thing to consider because good autofocus makes you get more shots, makes you get better shots, and helps the user experience a ton. So yeah, I definitely struggled with the autofocus while using this camera. While it actually hit focus a decent amount of times, I just found it less intuitive. Modern day autofocus is so seamless, and this just felt not only clunky, but very slow. Even something like the Sony a6000 from 2014 felt like a noticeable improvement in terms of ease of use for a beginner. It's just much easier to understand. This is really to be expected though. When you're getting a camera at this price point, there is going to be a lot of compromises. This is an important point to ask yourself. How much does autofocus matter to you? If you're shooting slower moving subjects, you may be able to get by with an older, cheaper camera. But for anything that moves a bit faster, you're going to feel the age of the older camera much more. So we've already gone over compromises in the part qualities, lack of modern features, and autofocus. But what about the big one, image quality? Is it even better than a smartphone? The image quality is actually pretty solid, way better than I expected. There's plenty of dynamic range as long as you get your exposure right and the colors look solid. I'm finding I have enough room to push and pull the photos in post to create the look I want, but things aren't perfect. While I can edit the files, I find it requires a bit more of a nuance. They can get crunchy looking pretty quickly. It gets even less perfect as the light gets dim. This camera and pretty much every camera in this price range starts to really show its age in low light. These older cameras just don't have the same level of high ISO performance that you get from even cameras one budget tier up. Even my first camera, Lumix G85, with a smaller sensor has better high ISO performance than this Nikon. Obviously this depends on the older DSLR you get, but I think a general rule of thumb is don't trust the high ISO performance of this class of cameras. Now this can be negated with better lenses, but that increases the price, which kind of defeats the purpose of buying such an old camera. Cheap price. Overall, I think the image quality of older DSLRs is still really solid, and you can use them even professionally today. But you really have to get your image perfect in camera because you just have less room to push and pull the files in post and crop because a lot of these older cameras tend to have slightly lower resolution sensors. Now for a beginner, this is a bit difficult because it's a lot of trial and error and learning how to do all this right in camera, but overall I think you can get great images out of any camera no matter how old the camera is. Heck, I've even used my old 2009 point and shoot Canon S95 and gotten images I'm super happy with. So it's just more about the photographer and learning how to use the gear you have at your disposal rather than what camera you're using or how old it is. There is one more key factor that should help make your decision if you should save longer or go with an older DSLR. And that's how easy the camera is to pick up, grab and go, and just shoot casually. I think this camera and many older DSLRs are harder to just grab and go. I didn't find myself wanting to grab this Nikon to use it to shoot because it was a bulkier camera, it was older, it wasn't as attractive looking to carry around, and the shooting experience was just less intuitive. I had to think more, which made just shooting for fun a bit harder. Now, why is this so important? The best way to learn photography is by shooting more. I've learned so much personally from carrying a camera everywhere with me, whether I'm going out to the grocery store or I'm going on a big trip. Having a camera everywhere with me has led me to get better shots and learn photography faster and get better at it quicker. Now, when you have a camera like an older DSLR, it's not as easy to just grab and go and take it everywhere with you, which means you'll be shooting less, which means you won't be learning as fast, which means it'll be harder to get into photography and stay into it. It's not an easy hobby to learn, so you really have to dedicate yourself to learning and practicing photography, and the easiest way to do that is by taking a camera everywhere with you. So after a few weeks using this camera from 2010, has my opinion changed? Honestly, I had to think about it long and hard, and I've come to a conclusion that I often say when reviewing camera gear. It's very situational based on your needs and wants. Let's start out with who should consider buying an older camera and not saving up a bit longer. If you are absolutely determined to get your hands on a camera, you've been shooting with your phone and use it to the maximum potential, you'll see benefits and learnings from getting any real camera you can get your hands on. Just keep in mind there's a good chance that you'll outgrow that cheaper camera much faster. On the bright side, these lower priced DSLRs have kind of hit the lowest price they'll ever get. So if you use it for a year and then sell it a year later, you won't be losing much money, if any at all, which means You're not taking a big loss if you try out an older DSLR first and then upgrade to a newer camera a year or so later. Now, if you're someone who's interested in photography but hasn't really developed a passion yet, I would keep shooting on your phone and really figure out if photography is something you care about and want to pursue. Download an app that gives you a bit more control over your phone's camera. Start learning editing, and you should be doing all this while still saving money, so when you're 100% sure photography is something you want to pursue, you'll already have some savings to get something a bit newer, a bit better, and a bit more enjoyable and easier to learn on. Now, if you're shooting video, it's a pretty easy choice. These older cameras shoot pretty bad video, and most phones can and will shoot better video. I would keep using your phone until you can save up a bit more for something at the very least like the Lumix G85. So what would my personal choice be if I was getting a camera for the first time right now? And has my advice really changed? Personally, I would save up an extra few months and increase my budget. If you can get into the $500 to $800 range, you open yourself up to much more modern cameras that in my opinion are much more enjoyable to use and easier to learn on. Did I get some solid images on the D3100? Sure. But the shooting experience and overall usability just felt so behind that compared to something that would cost only a few $100s more, I think it's worth waiting a few extra months and saving for something that will give a much better experience. Now, I want to know, what would you do? Whether you're a new photographer who's looking into picking up their first camera now, or if you're an experienced photographer looking back on when they first started. Let me know in the comments below. For now, go ahead and shoot some photos. Thanks for watching.